So, get this. President Trump has just publicly stated the U.S. will hold off on hitting Russia with powerful new tariffs unless European nations do something that seems, well, frankly impossible first.
Right. They have to immediately cease all energy purchases from Russia. Immediately.
And that condition, it's being called a poison pill behind the scenes, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's exactly why this tough talk is causing serious anxiety in places like Brussels and Berlin. They don't see this as a serious plan for Ukraine to win. They see it as a setup, a political play designed to fail, so the blame lands squarely on Europe's shoulders.
Welcome to Nation Scope Podcast. I'm Jordan.
And I'm Jamie.
This is where we dive into the latest headlines, the breaking stories, the big events shaping America and the world. Politics, culture, economy, tech, if it matters to you, we're analyzing it.
And today, we're really digging into this analysis called the Blame Shift Gambit, Trump, Ukraine, and Transatlantic division. Our goal here is to try and understand why Europe is so worried that this sudden U.S. push for total victory in Ukraine. Well, why they think it's less about real commitment and more about passing the buck.
That really is the heart of it, isn't it? So today we're going to break down the specific language being used, the words that seem engineered to set Europe up. We'll look at the two big reasons, very personal apparently, behind this massive policy U-turn. And we'll explore the worst case scenarios, like how the U.S. might point fingers if this war drags into a stalemate, or even worse, if Ukraine faces a collapse. Okay, Jamie, let's unpack this. The sheer back and forth on U.S. policy towards Ukraine just this year alone, it's really something. I mean, cast your mind back to early 2025, right after the inauguration. The whole focus was on making a deal, wasn't it?
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Policy was laser-focused on getting a quick negotiated peace. The talk was all about how any solution had to involve, and I quote, some land swapping. The administration was even signaling Putin's desire to keep Donetsk and Luhansk. And Trump himself was openly and apparently privately criticizing Zelensky for not being willing to compromise, for not finding an off-ramp.
Yeah, I remember that distinctly. But then, boom, late September, right after the UN General Assembly meeting, UNGA, everything flipped.
A total 180. It was a complete rejection of everything said before. After meeting Zelensky, Trump hit social media and declares that Ukraine, quote, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form.
Wow. So from pushing Kiev to give up land to suddenly championing total military victory, that's whiplash is the right word.
It really is.
But wait, are you seriously saying this massive shift with all its huge geopolitical implications boils down to personal frustration and needing a political escape route? That sounds incredibly reckless.
Well, that's what the analysis strongly suggests. It points to two main drivers, and neither is really about grand strategy. First, there was deep personal frustration. Trump has staked his deal-maker reputation on this, and he reportedly became incredibly impatient. He felt Putin was just stringing him along, that Putin had personally let me down by not engaging seriously after the inauguration.
So a personal insult essentially soured the diplomatic path.
That seems to be a big part of it. He lost faith in Putin as someone he could actually strike a deal with.
Okay, so if the deal path felt blocked because he felt slighted, he needed another way forward. What was the second trigger?
The second piece was getting new information, a new perspective on the actual situation on the ground. Several reports suggest his view shifted after briefings on the Ukraine-Russia military and economic situation. Apparently, he was briefed on a potential Ukrainian offensive, which might have significantly changed how he saw Kyiv's chances.
And what did he take away from that briefing?
The conclusion he reportedly drew was that Russia was actually in big economic trouble, that militarily, Russia was essentially a paper tiger.
Ah, okay. So that new belief that victory was suddenly within reach gave him the perfect political out.
Exactly. The deal-maker angle wasn't working out,
Yeah.
so pivoting to become the champion of victory was, convenient.
It allowed him to change the goalposts.
Precisely. Shift the objective from a negotiated peace he had to deliver to a military victory others, namely Europe, would now be responsible for achieving. It lets him sidestep any blame for the stalled diplomacy and positions him as the leader who made victory possible. Now, if total victory doesn't happen, well, it's Europe's fault.
Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating, the actual mechanics of this blame shift. The analysis highlights this really crucial pattern in all the official statements. Victory is always followed by that little phrase, with the support of the European Union. Always.
That phrase, tiny as it is doing all the heavy lifting here. It fundamentally changes the U.S. role. Suddenly, the U.S. isn't the strategic leader driving the effort. It's more like a conditional supplier, a vendor. Trump promised, quote, to continue to supply weapons to NATO for NATO to do what they want with them.
Which sounds like more aid, but isn't really.
It's not a new surge, no. It's
Okay.
basically just continuing an existing setup where European countries buy U.S. weapons through NATO channels. It's transactional. The U.S. is selling arms, but explicitly not guaranteeing the outcome of the war. That outcome depends on the EU.
And this narrative about Russia being a paper tiger, that plays into this too, right? It makes the task seem easier than it is.
Oh, absolutely. It's a deliberate framing device. Calling Russia militarily incompetent and the war aimless isn't just a military assessment. It strategically lowers the bar for what counts as success. The implied logic is, look, we told you Russia was weak. If you Europeans can't even beat this enemy with the weapons we're selling you, then the failure is clearly yours due to lack of will or competence. It's blame-proofing built right into the rhetoric.
Which brings us back to that jaw-dropping energy ultimatum we started with. The poison pill.
Yes, demanding Europe immediately cease all energy purchases from Russia. That's a near impossibility for some countries like Hungary, who are totally reliant on Russian pipelines. So, by making those threatened U.S. tariffs dependent on Europe doing the impossible first, the U.S. gets to keep its biggest economic stick tucked away.
And if Russia's economy doesn't tank?
Trump can say, well, it wasn't because we didn't have strong tariffs ready.
Ugh.
It's because Europe didn't take the crucial first step I demanded. See how it works? Blame shifted.
It really paints the alliance in a purely transactional light. Security isn't a shared commitment. It's just a product with a very high price tag.
It's been thoroughly transactionalized, as the analysis puts it, and the price keeps going up. Remember, allies already agreed to that new, much higher target, spending 5% of their GDP on defense by 2035. That was already a huge ask.
But now there's more. You mentioned a double payment. Explain that, because that sounds complicated.
It is. Okay, so any potential U.S. security guarantees for Ukraine itself are now being directly tied to a whole separate proposal. This proposal asks Europe to finance a massive $100 billion purchase of American weaponry for Ukraine.
Wait, so Europe has to spend 5% of its GDP on its own defense?
Correct. That's payment number one, essentially the price of admission, the insurance premium for their own safety within this new framework.
And they have to cough up another $100 billion to pay for American weapons going to Ukraine.
Exactly. That's payment number two. They pay for their own defense upgrade, and they finance the purchase of U.S. arms for Kyiv. Only then might they get some kind of conditional U.S. security guarantee for Ukraine.
That's extraordinary. It's basically demanding Europe subsidize the U.S. defense industry as a precondition for potential American support.
It's a massive potential wealth transfer, framed as burden sharing.
So how is this playing out in European capitals? All these demands, this conditional support. Publicly, we're seeing careful, coordinated responses, right? Trying to lock in the positive rhetoric while they can.
Yeah, publicly it's all diplomatic smiles. You have French President Macron calling Trump's message a very right one. You hear Eastern European officials responding with things like, Roger that. They're trying to embrace the total victory narrative, hoping to hold the U.S. to it.
But that's just the surface. What's happening privately?
Oh, privately, it's a completely different story. Deep skepticism.
Yeah.
A feeling of strategic whiplash, as one diplomat put it. The overwhelming sense is that this sudden shift isn't about renewed U.S. commitment at all. It's seen as a signal that Trump is actually starting to disengage, essentially saying, this is Europe's problem now.
So profound mistrust underneath the public statements.
Absolutely. Nobody trusts that this new policy will stick. They're bracing for the next reversal. That same NATO diplomat was quoted saying, nothing surprises anymore. We have to be ready for anything. That's the mood. Constant uncertainty.
And this feeling, this expectation that America isn't reliable, that must be driving Europe to accelerate its own plans, right, for more independence.
That's probably the biggest long-term impact we're seeing. They are actively and urgently planning for a future where they can't count on decisive American leadership. We're seeing this already with the rapid formation of a sort of coalition of the willing, primarily the UK, France, and Germany. They're gearing up to offer their own security guarantees to Kyiv and conduct what they call reassurance operations independently.
What does reassurance operations mean in real terms?
It means moving fast. It means speeding up joint European defense projects, setting up intelligence sharing that doesn't necessarily rely on U.S. channels, and crucially, trying to turn vague promises to Kyiv into concrete, legally binding agreements right now. They feel like they're in a race against time, you know? They need to lock things down before the U.S. political winds inevitably shift again. It's a scramble to build alternatives before the ground shifts beneath their feet. So you pull all this together, The consensus view from the analysts cited in the source material is pretty stark. This U-turn towards total victory. It's not seen as a serious sustainable policy. It's viewed as a calculated political move. An off-ramp, as we discussed, designed specifically to pre-position Europe to take the fall if things go wrong. Kurt Volker put it bluntly. Trump shifts the blame to Europe. The main goal seems to be insulating the administration from responsibility for failure.
And this whole political strategy is playing out while the actual war, the reality on the ground, looks very different from this paper tiger rhetoric.
Fundamentally different. We have to be clear here. Independent military analysts overwhelmingly agree that a complete Ukrainian victory, pushing Russia back to pre-2014 borders, is highly unlikely without a massive, sustained surge in direct Western military intervention.
Which the U.S. is explicitly not offering under this new framework.
Exactly. What we have is a brutal, grinding war of attrition. Russia still holds the strategic initiative in many areas, and it has a clear advantage in manpower and industrial capacity, even after suffering horrific casualties, maybe close to 1 million by now. So, hearing Russia dismissed as a paper tiger feels completely detached from the grim reality and the immense human cost of this conflict.
Okay, let's game this out then. Based on this blame shift strategy, what are the likely scenarios European leaders are bracing for? Let's take scenario A. The war drags on, a grinding stalemate into 2026.
Right. In that case, the blame mechanism gets triggered. Trump argues, look, I gave Ukraine the chance, I made weapons available via NATO, but Europe just didn't have the political backbone or the unity to see it through. The narrative will focus entirely on Europe's perceived failings. They didn't cut off Russian energy quickly enough. They were too slow hitting that new 5% defense spending target. They couldn't agree on the $100 billion fund, whatever the specific excuse is.
And the outcome of that narrative?
The message is crystal clear. I set them up to win, and they fumbled it. This becomes the justification for a formal U.S. pullback, leaving Europe divided and anxious, especially in the East. The administration claims a political win by blaming European incompetence.
Okay, now scenario B. The truly catastrophic outcome. A Ukrainian military collapse. Russia achieves a kind of Pyrrhic victory through sheer mass.
In that nightmare scenario, the blame game would go into overdrive. The U.S. would likely hammer Europe even harder, accusing them of half-hearted support, fatal delays, and total strategic incompetence. They let Ukraine fall. The consequences then become terrifying. We're talking about a potential collapse of confidence within NATO itself. Article 5, the Collective Defense Clause. If member states believe the U.S. wouldn't actually honor it after blaming Europe for Ukraine's fall, the entire alliance could fracture.
A NATO breakdown. That sounds like, well, like the worst possible outcome for European security.
It potentially is. It could trigger a chaotic scramble for national defense, possibly even uncoordinated efforts by some European states to acquire nuclear weapons for independent deterrence. You'd see new flashpoints, immense instability. It's not just political messaging. The stakes are incredibly high, potentially reshaping the entire global security order. So, pulling this all together, what's the key takeaway here for you listening and for Europe itself? Well, the core message from this analysis is pretty unambiguous. Europe needs to accelerate its push for real strategic autonomy now. Relying on the political mood swings in Washington just isn't a sustainable security strategy anymore. And critically, European leaders have to maintain unity. The blame shift strategy works best if it can divide Europe. So sticking together is paramount to resist those tactics. They need a united front.
And we see Europe trying, right? Racing to get these vague U.S. commitments written down, trying to lock things in while the rhetoric sounds supportive. But given everything we've just discussed, this clear pattern of transactionalism, the conditions, the blame shifting, it leaves you with a really tough question, doesn't it? Can Europe actually call the bluff, pin the U.S. down with paper agreements, and force real cooperation? Or is the only truly safe path forward now for Europe to operate on the assumption that future American reliability might just be zero and build accordingly? Something to think about as this incredibly complex and high-stakes diplomatic game plays out. You've been listening to Nation Scoop podcast, where Jordan and Jamie analyze the stories shaping America and the world. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.